Hello, everyone. This is BigReed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories. This is episode 22, The Last Remnant. All right, so this one is going to be pretty interesting because what I kind of wanted to do here was talk about The Last Remnant, which is a game probably nobody has heard of, and of course, it's a game I've played. Um, so obviously, RPGs are by far my favorite game. I lean towards Japanese role playing games. If I were to pick like a game to play, it would basically mirror, the traditional mechanics of like say like a Final Fantasy. So that's an easy one to kind of like it puts you into that realm of like what you're expecting with the Last Remnant and what we'll kind of cover today. Final Fantasy is one to kind of look to. So it's a Square Enix role playing game, but I want to talk a little bit more about like just kind of like my tastes and everything like that. So to pick one genre for me, if I were to pick only one genre or subgenre of video games, like to really iron it down, it's Japanese role playing games. So a lot of the traditions of having a party, a good battle system, a leveling system, equipment, exploring a world, having some type of interactive world map to some degree. Story focused, so you're kind of like playing through a story. There's bosses. It's very traditional, and RPGs have been around for forever. So you go back to, and there was even role playing games well before, like on the PC, years and years before the NES, where you would be scrolling through or reading like a text based adventure, and even that was like role playing. So there was a gap of role playing games where Western role playing games were there, but I would say they probably weren't as, I don't want to say popular or mainstream, but they definitely kind of filled a very unique void. And you would even have RPGs that were popular that were a little bit different, like dungeon crawling, like Diablo and everything like that. So if you're looking at the last 30 years, as a snapshot, you're kind of looking down. How it would kind of look is, yes, there was Japanese and Western role playing games, but it was definitely Japanese favored. Then there was a gap of the Xbox 360 era around that time, maybe a little bit before too, where Western role playing games just exploded, mainly with Bethesda, BioWare. Trying to think of who else. There's another one who has done Bethesda based games, but I can't remember the name of the company, but they're responsible for New Vegas Fallout, Obsidian, I believe. So you had a lot of like powerhouse, you have Skyrim, you have Fallout 3, like you have all these like gigantic, meaty Western RPGs. You have, Dragon Age, you have Mass Effect that kind of switched it where the gameplay was more, it could be more action focused, but you still have a lot of like those role playing mechanics. But it's normally the stories are generally told in like a Western setting. Across both, I prefer like a science fiction or something similar to that, or even like the old like JRPG style where it's not necessarily medieval. It's like it's steampunk, or there's magic mixed in with the world. So yeah, you have swords. You don't necessarily have guns and everything like that, like later Final Fantasies. But you kind of have that mix where it's not quite like fantasy. Like I'll give an example. Like Dragon Age is I loved the game, but I'm like the setting is just droll. Everybody's teeth are terrible. There's elves, like dwarves, and that's not bad, but it's just like not my go-to. Like everything just seems kind of like gross and dirty. So I think I lean towards science fiction, where I don't know. I definitely lean towards like sci-fi and everything like that. So saying all of that, the reason I preface that is smack dab in the middle, you have the seventh generation of consoles. So you have, the Xbox 360, the PS3, and the Wii, coming off of just complete dominance of the PlayStation. We usher into an era of now the most popular video game console is a Western game console, and everybody's just like, what is happening? It was also weird because most Japanese developers preferred to develop for the Xbox 360. The odd thing is the Xbox 360 is not liked or popular in Japan. They do not like Western consoles. They like Japanese consoles, and that's just how it is. So you would have the Xbox 360 was just absolutely crushing sales in, North America and Europe, and it just had almost no Japanese presence. Like, I think the Japanese were just suffering through the PlayStation 3 because they're like, we do not want a Western console. So here's the weird gap and the weird situation that you're placed into, which has probably led to The Last Remnant being just such a strange video game that after playing it again, the remastered version, I'm just like, I can't tell if I love this game or I hate it and want to delete it off of my console because it's driving me bonkers. But you have all of these Japanese developers and these Japanese games going onto a Western console as an exclusive, which is absolutely like mind blowing. It's like the entire industry through one new console launch just completely did a 180. For whatever reason during this time, Japanese developers greatly struggled with the, new Unreal Game Engine, the new hardware. And the main difference is we already had 3D graphics across two of the previous generations. However, now you have high definition. And I don't know what caused the disruption of Japanese game developers not being able to develop for these first few years of this console. Everything was a buggy mess. It was just such a weird time. Now, a lot of this has corrected itself. Japanese, Western developers, all the hardware, like anybody can make anything now. There's not that issue. But it was such a strange time that not a lot of people really remember. Like, people don't remember that if you wanted to continue playing JRPGs, you had to buy an Xbox 360, which sounds absolutely like redundant almost. It's like, that doesn't make sense. And there was also like the resurgence, or I don't know if you'd call it a resurgence, but the just absolute dominance of Western developers during that time, especially the first 5 years of the seventh generation. It was just completely one-sided. Here's the other thing that was really odd, and this will lead us into The Last Remnant, giving it a little bit more history about it, and then kind of discussing it. So, my experiences with the game, and then kind of just, I don't know, talking about the game itself, is there was also a huge drop-off in JRPGs. So this was a very weird time where the previous generation, you have Final Fantasy X, for example. So Square has Final Fantasy X and 12. So that's kind of what we're coming off the heels of. And, I love Final Fantasy 12. It's absolutely incredible. There are some people that will nitpick it a little bit just because it's more open world. Awesome game. Final Fantasy X, probably the best Final Fantasy. It's definitely the best selling, which I think we talked about that on a previous podcast. That kind of blew my mind that it sold significantly more than even Final Fantasy VII. Wasn't quite expecting that. But you're coming off of, the PlayStation 2, which is the exact opposite. Like, you have a generation of just Japanese hardware and software dominance, and then you switch, and for whatever reason, like, you look at Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion, and that game just sold really well, absolutely amazing, giant open world. I think it launched pretty early too, and then just no Japanese games, just so many issues with them. So it's very strange, right? And even coming from Square, you look at the quality and it's just like, what is going on? Like, why can't they figure this out? So The Last Remnant is developed by Square Enix. It is a Japanese role-playing game, but let's just kind of kick it off by saying it is unlike any other game I've played before. I don't think there's anything to play it to, or excuse me, to compare it to when you play it. And the more that you play it and the more that you learn about it, the stranger it gets. And it's so hard to explain it to somebody who's never played it. And guess what? There are a lot of people that have not played it. The Last Remnant, I remember at the time, there was a big marketing push. And it was, I think, Square Enix's first title where they were launching it worldwide, which honestly, this would kind of become the standard for a lot of large video games, where it used to be Japanese developers would release it in Japan first. It was either successful or it wasn't. If it was successful and there was a Western audience for it, or they believed there was a Western audience for it, it would get translated, localized, and then launched. So you might, there were games in Japan like back in the day where we just never got, they just didn't come over, which was like a bummer because if most of the developers at the time that were developing for consoles were Japanese based developers. And, if you like those games, you kind of just have to wait. And I would say with the technology boom, with everything just kind of like, changing over the last 20 years, the world has gotten smaller. So, The Last Remnant is a good example where Square's like, we want a global strategy as opposed to having a separate Western and Eastern strategy, which I actually do agree with. I think that is actually very fair and understandable. And I think that is probably best for the future is to like have the game kind of finalized, like include the localization in the development cycle and get it ready but don't mitigate the quality. That's the biggest thing is you have to localize the game, but first you have to kind of like translate it. And there's a lot of wonky things that, people who play JRPGs or Japanese games in general that you've kind of dealt with. And the way, a company like Nintendo kind of mitigates this is, does Mario talk? No. Yeah. Does Link talk? No. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of voice acting necessarily. So there's not a lot of, crazy translation that needs to happen. Like you can have a translation that's maybe a little bit more true to form and resonates a little bit easier because it's reading it. So however those characters sound in your head is how they sound. But whenever you record it, that awkwardness kind of doesn't come out where you're trying to just deliver lines that are just maybe the localization didn't make sense. So Last Remnant launched worldwide. And I remember being in Best Buy and, like walking around and I remember seeing big posters for it and everything like that. I think it came out in 2009, but I remember seeing like big posters for it. I was like, oh, this looks cool. The cover, The Last Remnant, that's a pretty cool name. Square Enix, okay, I'm the 2 for 2. You have your generic looking main character who looks like just a traditional JRPG main character. I'm like, hey, I'm sold, right? And then you buy it and you start playing it, and it's just unlike anything I've ever played before. So on the 360, there were a few things that were kind of known about the game, but there was a very high difficulty curve. And basically I think the game was 2 discs, and at the end of disc 1, you're in an area where there's a giant, event that happens, a massive boss fight, and you lead into disc 2 and the rest of the game. And I remember just being in that boss fight and it didn't seem fair. It didn't make sense. I'm just getting obliterated. So eventually I was just like, I'm not going to finish this game. They remastered it, and there was a PC version that balanced a lot of it out. And I don't want to say it would make it easier, but they did do a lot of balancing, which was interesting. And then the remaster is based upon the PC version of the game and not the Xbox 360 version. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. And what happened is I didn't finish it on 360. And I bought it because I think it was like $20 or something like that, like on sale or something. But I bought it and downloaded it on the Switch, played it a little bit, and then recently re-downloaded to kind of come back to it. So the good news is I'm past the part on the 360, and I'm kind of, I'd probably say I'm like 70% of the way through. And there are things that I just absolutely love about this game and can understand and appreciate kind of where Square was coming from. But to summarize the game as we kind of break this down, the best way I can kind of summarize it is I don't believe that any of the developers of the game played the game before they released it, especially the 360 version. There's no way that they played the game all the way through or did testing or just got any type of player feedback. And to be honest, I know back in the day, I remember, this is just another, lost memory of gaming, right? I remember watching a news article where a reporter who was like not a gamer went to a company. I think he went to Sega. So I think they had these in house, but it was like you can get hired to be a game tester. I think you still can. So you basically like test the unreleased product. You have to sign an NDA. But I distinctly remember he was playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3. It was 2 or 3. But he's like playing that on the Genesis, and like you're just playing the same game, playing the same game. It was kind of funny like watching him play because he's in a suit and tie, and he's not a gamer, and he's just like, man, you just like keep playing and you're trying to find like bugs and all this stuff. And I think that is kind of important. I don't believe that you need to have like an online release. So I think that's happened a lot these days, like where, you know, you have an alpha or you have a beta for an online specific game to not only do the server testing and everything, but to ensure that you're getting feedback, right? I do think part of the process for game development, and it has to be like maybe I'm wrong here, like there has to be, you have to play the game. And I don't mean to play it to make sure it's functional, like as you're developing a section of game, you're making sure that glitches aren't happening. But you have to play it and like, does the game make sense? Like what we're creating, is this fun? First of all, is it fun to play? Is the gameplay good? And like, if we just give people this game with what we've created, when they start playing it, is it going to make sense to them? Is the structure going to make sense? You know, and the short answer is I think no. And I have been reading a lot of like online comments as I've been playing it, and man, the feedback on, so the first of all, the reviews, like this got like roughly like a 60%, you know, on average. I don't think I can kind of check right now. I don't think it averaged higher than 60%. So Xbox Series 66% on Metacritic. Okay. So that gives us like an understanding, and I would say that's probably pretty fair. You know, like, but not all aspects of the game are 66%. There's some things where I'm like, I like this 9 out of 10. Like this part is a 9 out of 10. Then you have another part and it's like, this is a 3 out of 10. So you're getting an average of like 2 different sections of the game where one is kind of pulling a lot of weight. I want to say the game sold across the 360 was around like 600,000 copies. All in all, probably like 1.5 million. If those Steam copies were accurate, like they're saying 800,000 copies linked. I don't know if that means paid, but you're looking at like, you know, 1.5 million copies, but definitely a dud on the Xbox 360. There was a big marketing push for it, for sure. Like I remember being, you know, in the stores, in GameStops, in Best Buys, and like I could see a lot of like marketing for it. I don't recall commercials. I don't watch a lot of TV in general, so I don't recall a lot of like commercials. I imagine that Microsoft was also trying to help push this title because it wasn't exclusive. So you probably would see that. But I really think just the reviews probably didn't help. But the game is just like so odd. So, okay. Generally speaking, you know, in an RPG, especially a JRPG, you'll have separate characters. So like, you know, say you'll have a party of 4, party of 5, whatever it is, and you control those characters individually. Well, in The Last Remnant, you have something called battle unions, and as you progress the game, you're allowed to have more characters and more battle unions. I think you start with 3 and so many characters, but basically, you know, each battle union, you have a main party member, so like a leader of that party, and you can have up to 5 different, you know, of the various races of, you know, different, you know, people are either better at magic or better at combat arts. So it can be made up of 5 characters, and they all act individually, but you only select what they do based upon action points as a group. If your leader dies, and this is the other weird part, is so your battle union has like so many HP. So like right now, so like my characters say there's 4,500 HP, and each of them have their separate HP that makes up that total HP. Now here's the weird thing. The characters can be killed individually and healed individually. The group can be healed and they act separately, but you control them as a group. So they act separately. The controls a group. On the 360 version, I think there was a lot more confusion because anytime you would select attacks, it would be, kind of generic. So you take your battle unions and you put them up against other enemy battle unions, right? So you might have 3 battle unions. You might be facing 5 battle unions. So already 5-3. You're already outnumbered. And as you kind of like go across the map and everything, they auto engage, but you select like what you want them to do roughly. Now, the good news is on the updated versions, you can actually see what specific individual attacks and spells and everything they'll use as you kind of, push them in there. So that does help a lot. But what's just so odd is your party leader dies. That can lead to the rest of the party not being able to make any actions. However, they're still alive. So, okay. Partly what made me want to make this is like the game lacks a structure. So it's almost like we got a completed game that was never tested by the developers. So they put all these like very unique and convoluted and very detailed and in-depth ideas into the game. But the way the game's structured, it's like the player only got, I'm trying to think of like an overview, I guess you would say, or a template of like, okay, hey, here's all of the structure. Here's the skeletal structure of the game. Here's the premise. And we're not going to really like develop the other things that, So, for example, we got, 9 chapters of a book and we got the chapter titles. But when you go to like look into the chapters, there's no words. It's just blank. So it's like chapter 1, the hero arises. Cool. Chapter 2, combat system. And then you go to read about the combat and there's nothing there. They just forgot to like flesh it out and tell the story. Like questing is fun, but it also kind of makes you want to like rip your hair out because there's no structure. It doesn't make sense. Like you pull up your main menu, you read the quest, and the translation's so silly. Like I was doing one of the quests called The Assistant, and you go and you're collecting materials for someone. So you go into a new area. Now, keep in mind, you can only collect materials with a non-playable character, a little NPC guy called Mr. Diggs, who looks like a mole with a claw on his head. And as you kind of just like have him dig, so you get like, say, 10, 11, 12 digs per zone. The way the world map works too is you have your world map. You can't walk around it. You kind of overview, you select the areas, you press A, you go into it, and then you can kind of run around in the area, which actually I don't mind that at all. I think sometimes that's a little bit easier than having a world map. I like both sides. I understand why people like having a world map they can traverse because it feels more, I don't want to say open world necessarily, but there's like a feeling of exploration, and some people like that. I'm just as good with, selecting it on a map and then going into a fully developed area. And when you go into the area, depending on like where you pop out at, so if there's like you get the map for the area and you see, you can exit left, that might lead you to another zone that you can go into, which that's all fine and dandy. But for the questing, it's just you have the weird localization where it's like I'm talking to some jabroni, like they just use odd words that don't make a lot of sense in English. Like it makes Rush, because it's telling the story from his perspective. Rush Sykes is the main character. And it just makes him seem really annoying. He's like, some annoying guy wants me to go find a bunch of stuff. What a dork. I better go find it. Where it might make more sense to have, like, say, a Skyrim approach where it's, here's where the quest is. Here's what you have to do next, and here's where you go. How you get there and what you do when you're there, like, the developers kind of like putting their arms up and stepping back, like, you figure that out. You know what I mean? So you have a structured open world. And that's what I like. I like a structured open world. I like knowing where I need to be or what I need to do for a quest. But then leave me alone. So give me this nice big world map. Let me look at what I want to do. And then just leave me alone. Because I might just play 4 hours of, just walking around, questing, talking to people, getting new characters. And that is part of the fun of the game, is getting new characters for your party. So like for your unions, you obviously have like your main characters. You have your like, there's I think the four main generals of the starting zone. Those guys are all cool. They look cool. I actually, you have a lot of different races, and I know I'm bouncing around here, but you have, Catmandus, which they're a giant, tall cat guy who lives forever with four arms. You have a little frog guy. You have a big fish guy. Hey, I'm cool for all of this, right? I actually like don't mind how the characters look. I like it, right? It's not a super inspired world, but you got different characters. You got humans thrown in there too. You have these magical relics called remnants that are super powerful and destructive and amazing. All of this is fine and dandy. In the beginning, too, what's kind of funny is they kind of give you like generic NPCs to build your unions. And then as you go through this world to complete quests and, help out your main characters, uh, you can unlock other. I don't want to say like they're NPCs, but they clearly look different. Like they have cool designs. They're way more powerful. I like all of that. But what's odd is just the functionality of the questing kind of stinks. It doesn't tell you like necessarily where to go. It doesn't tell you where to find these materials. The characters, the main characters, the NPCs, they can tell you like items they need to upgrade their stuff. So like all this I like. I actually like the unions. I like the character creation. I like designing the unions. Like it's kind of interesting. But then anytime you go to do anything, it's like the game just gets in the way of being annoying and making you not want to play it. It's like, okay, I kind of like this. I like traveling around the world. Oh, I can go here and maybe it looks like there's some world map at the bottom here. I bet you I can go into this area and go down or go south, excuse me, exit and there's a new area. And most of the time you can. You know what I mean? But then everything else is just so convoluted and like just silly that it's just hard to make sense. Like, okay, I want to get crafting materials, so I'm trying to find platinum ore, for example, because anytime I leave an area, 10 of my characters are like, hey, I need platinum ore, because they will improve their own weapons if you find uh, crafting materials and everything like that that the characters need. I like that. I like that. I want to go and just harvest. And anytime you like fight enemies, like, they have drops. If you capture them alive, you can either sell them for money or you can break them apart for components that, characters will need. I like that stuff. Hey, where do you find that stuff? No clue. If I didn't have the internet, I would have no clue where to find this. And guess what? Anytime I'm like, man, I can't figure this out and I Google it, everybody's just like complaining about the game. Like I so far across all of my research, and I might reach out to him. I saw somebody who posted a lot about the game and had a breadth of knowledge. Like it's just they seem very interesting. I probably am going to message them just to be like, hey, I saw your post and I can feel your passion about the game. But long story short, most people are like, this game doesn't make sense. It doesn't explain. And yes, there are answers like how you build your battle union and how you get them to interact with what they are doing in the battles that they're fighting. There is a lot of strategy there that the game does just a horrible job of explaining to you because it feels completely random, honestly. Like in the remaster version, there it feels a lot less like that. So generally speaking, like, you okay. Let's talk a little bit about how the combat system actually works because I'm getting like all amped up and excited here. So you have three battle unions. Say the enemy has three battle unions. You can look at those battle unions on a big open map and you can select how you engage those battle unions. If I have, one and one and I send one out, if they engage with the battle union, they're not intercepted or anything like that, you can actually deadlock by setting up like, hey, I'm going to attack them with combat arts, which are like physical attacks, basically. Then you guys lock into a battle, and you're basically only fighting them until you decide to do otherwise, right? Now, say you interact with somebody and, another unit flanks you. Okay, well, there's a morale gauge, and you get flanked by an enemy union, your morale is going to go down. They're going to have a higher chance for critical hits and all of this stuff, and they'll be able to attack you without you being able to attack them. So you're kind of moving these battle unions around. The enemy's moving the battle unions around. But the first thing I will say is, if the enemy has more battle unions, it's really annoying. You have to be very careful. You have to keep your HP up. Like they just have a tactical advantage that is immeasurable because they have more, you know. So there are ways of, you can choose to have less battle unions. So right now, I'm up to 4. I can have 5, but I'm up to 4 because I wanted to put more characters in them to give them like higher HP and everything like that, to make them more effective at attacking, more spells and everything like that, and just more balanced overall, to make sure they're not just getting wiped out, by having one. So based upon, your relation to where you're at on the map, who you're engaged in combat with from a battle union to a battle union standpoint, you'll have different attacks and everything you can do. There's like super attacks called the Remnants, which don't even get me started on that because I'm hitting a point now where your Remnants kind of fight you and you're just like, ah. But some of the things that don't make sense from a battle standpoint is if the enemy outnumbers you, the game and the enemies don't operate in the same rule set of the game that was developed. So I'll give you an example of it done well and where it makes sense, and compare it to the Last Remnant where it does not make sense. Where it makes sense is, say, like you just take a Final Fantasy game. You have 4 characters, and they can do attacks, they can have spells, they can defend, they can do blah, 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 they can use items, they can recover. Okay, that's your set of rules. They have equipment, right? That's your set of rules that you're operating in. Most games, the enemies will operate in those same sets of rules, right? Okay, that's generally how you should make the game. Because it's like, okay, this is what you have created. And the enemies should do something very similar, especially in JRPGs, right? For The Last Remnant, the only way I can describe it is it feels like the enemies, in particular, a lot of the boss fights, do not operate in the same rule setting. So, for example, your battle union might have, say, 4,000, 4,500 hit points. An enemy that you will fight will have battle unions that will probably be somewhere similar in terms of HP. And we'll talk about battle rank in a second because this is another crazy thing. But generally speaking, they'll be very similar to you. So those in of themselves are already a tough fight. Because if your battle union can do, spells that hit everyone and poison everyone and paralyze everyone, they can do the exact same thing. So essentially, since enemies pretty much scale with you, one of your battle unions is roughly equal to an enemy battle union, but they just might not have like a super attack that you might have very occasionally that you can use. Keep in mind, you don't even get to use it all the time. It's just like, oh, cool, I've used it every few battles or so. Okay. So, first of all, if the enemy or boss fight has more battle unions and they're roughly equal to you, you're already at a significant disadvantage. Now, let's take a boss character. A boss character, and it gets worse as time goes on. I don't want to tell you how many freaking hit points some of these bosses have. But looking at it, so, hey, I'm fighting a boss that right now that has 200 and we'll say 200,000 hit points. I have 4,500. Even with all 4 of mine, they have like 20 times more HP than I do. They also have special attacks and special spells or whatever you want to call them that operate outside of the rules of the battle system that I operate in. So not only do they have significantly more HP, they have things that they can do that I can't do. It's just crazy. So like right now, I'm in a spot where you're going into these bases, and I talked about this earlier. It was kind of funny. But there's these forts or bases you have to go through and complete 6 of them before you can go into the center one that unlocks it. And okay, so how does it work? You start off and you're outside, you're assaulting the base. So the game kind of looks and feels like it's like Risk almost. That would probably be the best way to describe it. So you have your Risk board. you have your pieces, and you're kind of moving your pieces around and then attacking and engaging, and it's very similar to that. So I actually, once again, I don't necessarily dislike the battle system. I actually kind of enjoy like playing the game. It's just you get to these points and okay, so let me just kind of backtrack here. Okay, so you're outside of the fort and you have probably about 20 enemy unions to fight. Then there's like an outside enemy boss, and then you get inside the fort, right? So already you're fighting an uphill battle where I'm just fighting significantly more units. Now I can engage and kill them probably easier than they can kill me a little bit. But I'm telling you right now, if you, it's 3-1, so like you just one of your guys, one of your battle unions is getting flanked by like 3 different people, they're just gonna die. So in one round, you're gonna die. You're gonna have to bring them back, and that happens fairly frequently. So that's pretty frustrating. You complete the outside, you go inside, and it's like you have to fight the boss that is in there. Cool. I like boss fights. The bosses, some of them, there's no way they balanced this out or played it and said and just like there's no way they got the development feedback by playing this. It's just literally impossible because it doesn't feel like any other part of the game. So the character that I'm fighting, I think his name's like Milton, and you guys can Google this, Milton, the Last Remnant, and you'll probably see a lot of articles where it's like, I can tell like people are like rage quitting the game. They're like, this isn't fun. Like I'm trying to convince myself that this is fun, and I'm not having fun. And that's where I left out on the Xbox 360. I was just like, man, this is not fun, and I want to play something else. So go to fight Milton, and of course he has 5 or 6 battle unions with him. So it's like, okay, I'm not only am I have a boss character, but I have other characters that can kill me that are roughly equal or even greater in strength than I am. Okay. So I clear all those guys out. And then I just cannot believe that this was like developed and they were like, this is good. Milton is my last guy I got to beat. And he does a move where he just buffs himself with every single stat. So that's already like, we're already at a tough point, right? It's already like, okay, he's super buffed and this is a problem. Any battle unit that engages with him, he also gets a bonus random attack where he attacks each person in that battle union in your party, but you cannot react to it. And he's doing an attack that is a one-shot, one-kill. And he focuses on your party leader. And guess what? If your party leader dies, the rest of the battle union can't act or do anything. So like main person dies, the whole battle union might as well have died. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. So, you know, it was my fault because apparently the strategy is like having 2 battle unions be engaged, you know, in a battle link or whatever with him, and then have the other 2 like hang back and heal and, you know, shoot spells from a distance, which is all fine and dandy. But he literally just, he attacks all 5 of your characters in a battle union out of all 4. So all 20 of my characters, well, probably like 18. All 18 of my characters are getting hit. And half of them are dying instant one-shot KOs. And it's just like, you don't operate in the same rule set of this stupid battle system that I have to exist in. And there are ways to like, you know, have different strategies, focus on healing, make your battle unions better, you know, go and find different components to like level up your characters. Like there are ways to kind of mitigate this, but it's just absolutely constant. Now here's the flip side. Can you over level and quote unquote level up? No, there's not really like a grinding necessarily in this game. Like the effective grinding that you want to do is, you know, doing the quest and doing the components and getting those like additional unique characters that are just stronger than your generic, you know, NPCs. And that's kind of like where you want to quote unquote grind. But there's a battle rank, and the battle rank is the leveling system. So each of the characters doesn't have leveling, but you have a battle rank. So I think I'm like battle rank 66 or something like that. And at that battle rank, there is an entire system of enemies that scale with you and how much HP you get for them and everything like that. But they scale. So there's a handful of enemy units at this point where I go through and they can't do enough damage to me, and I just basically like one shot them. But pretty much everything else, everywhere you're at, like if you engage with, three enemies on the open world, you might have a hard time because their HP is also going to increase. Their damage is going to increase. It was actually funny. I sent one of my friends like, "Hey, here's how the battle rank slash leveling system works," and it's like 80 pages. It's like you just keep scrolling and it's just calculations. It's like somebody took calculus or a spreadsheet, with statistics in it, and they were like, "This is what it's going to be," and then we'll do this. And it's like they developed it, but they forgot to test it to see like, oh, hey, this doesn't make sense because we could accidentally have a boss with 2 million hit points and their battle rank might be high, but they might kind of suck. And like we just didn't test it. I don't know. Like the game also had at launch, and why I think there's something to this where I honestly I don't think people that if they were testing it, they did not collect or listen to the feedback. If they collected the feedback, they intentionally were just like, we know better. Like we're not going to listen to this feedback that you provided us. But part of the reason why I believe that might be what it is the game. This was the first game where they did Unreal Engine for Square, and it was just a buggy mess. Like the graphics were muddy, like, and that still is kind of true with the remaster. Like it was kind of hard for them to kind of like fix a lot of that, but it's muddy. Like the characters, like you'll kill an enemy and they just ragdoll drop, which was common in Unreal Engine. So the game was full of bugs. So it kind of leads me to believe that they weren't testing it, or I can't even imagine what it was. Or it was crunch time and they're like, hey, we need to release this. Like we need to get this out so we can go focus on Final Fantasy. I don't know. But there's just no way they really played around with the battle rank system. And keep in mind, the more that you know about the game, like you can be more effective. You can make good unions. You can have better strategy and everything like that. But it still doesn't really help because the game doesn't teach it. Like as far as I see, there's not a really good, like there's tutorials, but I think it's overly complicated. And I think once you're creating something that an end user interacts with, you want to design it with a common sense approach, almost like you should be able to show it to a 5-year-old and a 5-year-old should understand it. Like if you can't explain it at kindergarten level, like you can't explain it. And this is impossible to explain. Like you can. There's an explanation for it. I've seen the statistics and the spreadsheets and like I'm like, okay, this is how I do it. But I don't think you're ever going to win me over with the ridiculous difficulty spikes where it's not that they're over leveled, it's not that they do this or that. It's they operate outside of what the rules of the video game are. And it's just absolutely wild. Like I don't know. There's a lot of things I like. Like I actually enjoy the battle system. It stinks that they're probably never gonna do this again because I do like it. Like I like traveling around, exploring. Using Mr. Diggs to get components and resources and everything like that. Like there are good things. I like finding cool characters. I don't even think the story's necessarily bad. I think just the main driving force is like kind of like uninspired. I've heard people compare it to Final Fantasy 12, but if you were going to compare it to Final Fantasy 12, it would be an incredibly watered down version that is missing the details, is the only way I could describe it. I think I've said that phrase a few times, but I don't know. The Last Remnant is just like so interesting, and I would call it kind of a flop, but it was enough for Square to update the PC version and re-release it. I just can't imagine if anyone should play it or not. Like I'm not sure because like the characters aren't that great. The main character is kind of annoying. This is sadly another JRPG where the main character is just not a relatable or enjoyable person to be around. I don't dislike him or anything like that. And you have an antagonist who I think they're going the Sephiroth approach. They do something that is reminiscent of Final Fantasy VII and kind of a creative freedom they took there with the story that impacts the player. With this, it just doesn't have the same impact, but it's just like so interesting. It's I can see where if I used to review games, and I could see where I would land at like a 6 out of 10. but it wouldn't be balanced. It's like this part is cool. I kind of like this. There's something here. There's something in this game that is enjoyable, that is worth trying. But to recommend the overall product, it's like, man, I don't know. And that honestly, that doesn't happen a lot with games where different sections of the game are wildly different in enjoyment and quality. Normally it's like, oh, the game's kind of, uninspired. The gameplay's okay. It's kind of boring. The story's not very good. It's a 6 out of 10 because, like, most of the game's, like, mediocre, you would say, right? It's like, hey, these three elements are super interesting and I like them, and they're a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Like, I like this. I like the battle system. I like the battle unions. I like creating my characters. I like that there's more of a focus on, updating your characters, and yeah, like I like that. Like, a battle ends and some of their statistics level up separately as opposed to like a whole level. Like, I like a lot of that things. And then it's like the questing's terrible. The story's not very good. The gigantic difficulty spikes and the just annoyingness of sections of the game. And it's not like it's not documented. Like, if you start, like, every time I Google something, they're like, this is so unbelievably annoying. And it's not like difficult. So, like, I'll give a great example. The Soulsborne series, so Dark Souls, like all of those games in that, Elden Ring, everything, the difficulty feels fair because everything operates in the rules and the development of the game, the battle system. Like, even the main characters, they might have like big attacks, but it's like this is expected, and the better you get at the game, the more effective you are at, the difficulty. Like, it's fair. Like, I feel that the difficulty in those games, which are seen as difficult, are fair. This does not feel fair. It feels like you turn a corner and you just, get hit with the pie in the face and you had no time to just react. It's just like, oh, I guess I'm going to lose. And there's times where, like, I've fought the bosses like 20 times in a row and then I can finally pull through it, but it never felt like the boss battle or, the next section of the game. I never felt like it was fair or that I had control of the situation. So, you've been fighting your random battles, you fight a boss, it's difficult, you got to like pay more attention, you got to have a little bit more strategy, but it feels like you're in control of the situation. It feels like you're completely out of control. It's just like I'm getting smacked around, and I feel like sometimes it is a little bit luck based. Like, okay, hey, my character actually blocked this time, or my character hit a critical and the morale went back in my favor, or I was able to keep the morale up high because one of my attacks hit a critical and knocked him out, where on my other playthrough or my other attempt at this, it didn't. That's where kind of like the luck and the statistics kind of come in. But it's a tough one because it's like it's a fascinating game, and I think it's bad. I think it's good. Like, I don't know. Like, playing it, sometimes I'm like, man, I really enjoyed playing it this hour. And then there's other times where I'm like, I just need to not play this game anymore. It's not good. And it's so funny, like, reading comments about the game, because it's like there's so, like, every time I've had just difficulty or I'm like, this is getting really annoying, I look it up and everybody's like, there's people like ready to quit the game. So it's like all well documented that even with the PC version, I feel like they should have tweaked the battle rank system or tweaked other things that made it make more sense, or keep everything as is and just nerf the crap out of the boss fights. Like, it's fine, I guess, to take multiple times to beat a boss. That's not really the issue. It's when it feels like it's not fun anymore, or you're not improving or getting better, or like it just doesn't make sense. Like, why would a boss have 250,000 HP or worse? Later on, I was reading like some of the bosses have 2 million hit points. I know none of my characters. I was watching a 100% playthrough because it's funny to see the people that are very interested in the game because they freaking just love it. But it's funny seeing how, like, their battle union has 7,000 HP. 7,000 versus 250,000 in a system that is already very, very, very unique. It doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I can't tell you if you should play the game. I wish more people would have played it so they could be like, wow, that was really weird. Like Square is such an odd company. And I think as a publisher, they publish a lot of like JRPGs that are definitely worth playing. Even if it isn't necessarily up to their standards that they're capable of achieving, like a Final Fantasy 7, a Final Fantasy 10, like they're Chrono Trigger, my gosh, right? Like they're capable of making some of the best games of all time. So that's like kind of a standard that they're held to, which isn't necessarily always fair. But I would say as a publisher, they publish a lot of games that I'm like, okay, this is interesting, this is different, this is new. And I think that's where the Last Remnant falls in. It's like, this is different, this is interesting, this is new. Is it good? I don't know. Games are supposed to be fun, right? You're supposed to have fun when you're playing them. And it's not always, necessarily fun to play. And even if I feel like, man, if they just did a better questing system of like, hey, here's the 3 items I need to get, here's where I can find them. Or on the world map, what would make so much sense is on the world map, list like, because you can't run around when you go in towns too. Like you have to go into a section of the town, then you can run around. Which once again, I'm fine with. I don't dislike that. If the loading screens were a little bit faster, I it's almost like fast travel when they introduced that into Persona. I'm fine with all of that. Like once again, don't have a problem with that. Like in some people might. Like it would be funny if this was a 9 out of 10 game and that was the criticism. Hey, I want to be able to run around towns in between areas but that's not even like what's important. It's when you're, going to do something and interact with the game. Like does it make sense? And even if they updated the questing system to say, hey, here's where you can go to get this, like there's a quest here, that would be awesome. You know what I mean? And it was kind of funny, I was reading one of the quests that I was talking about earlier, and on the Xbox 360 version it requires an immense amount of materials that have kind of randomized drop rates. They can have low percentage drop rates, and if you were to have done it on the 360, you would have had to exited and entered that same area and go all the way back into that area to go to the one spawn point where you'll find those items, like deep within the cave, running past enemies. At this point, you might as well not even fight them sometimes. Running past enemies to do that when it's like, okay, hey, that's kind of stupid. Why don't we make the quantity less? Or why don't we like tell people where it is so they want to like achieve these things? Like I still think one of the best things about Skyrim is it's open world, but it's like structured so you have your quests and you know where you need to go to do that quest. But you don't have to do it right then and there. And how you get there and how you go about it is, completely up to you. So should you play this game? I don't know. Should anyone play this game? Like, I really, I can't. It's funny. Like, I want people to play it so you can be like, right? Isn't that weird? It's like, I love it and I hate it. But probably what's going to happen, sadly, is I'm going to end up deleting it off of my Switch again. Only to re-download it 4 years from now. It's funny. It was supposed to get a PS3 version and they just, like, didn't. It was already a buggy mess and there was already, like, graphical issues and it wasn't well received. It didn't sell well. The PS3 was hard to develop for. They were just like, never mind. And it's so funny because this was supposed to be like such an important title for Square. And it just kind of like exited the door and just fell flat on its face. But it didn't have to. I feel like not even the lead developer. We don't even need, but you could just have like 5 people be playing it while you're developing and be like, hey, this isn't good. We need to hear, what feedback are we getting? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. We should probably fix it. It's more, they could have made the game 10 times more enjoyable if they kept it exactly the same, but just tweaked some of the things that like, players were kind of giving them feedback on. And it's such a shame because I think for the Last Remnant, there's things to like about it, but the things that are bad about the game are so rough that they make you question your sanity if you're even playing a good video game or having fun. Once again, difficulty has shown to be something that players enjoy, but unfair difficulty is just not enjoyable. People don't like it. So the Last Remnant it's the Last Remnant. It is the last version of whatever that series could have been. I think they might have wished it could have been a series. They wish they could have had a sequel with it. They probably would have been really happy if it would have sold 5 million copies globally. But sadly, I think, we were fortunate to get a remaster of the PC version re-released. I think there is a place for this game for certain people who might like figuring complicated things out. But to me, the Last Remnant is a Rubik's cube that you're trying to figure out. But the developer of the Rubik's cube accidentally switched a lot of the colors around, and you can't switch them back. And it's like, okay, solve this. And it's like, well, it's not exactly solvable. And it's like, right? Well, this is it. We're not going to really fix it too much anymore. So yeah, I wanted to get my thoughts out on the Last Remnant. It's interesting. I might do a part two, depending on how my next few hours of the game go, and if I can reach out to this person to kind of like talk to them a little bit, just to kind of get their perspective on it. Like I might do a part two and maybe get a perception from somebody that like really enjoys the game. But yeah, so this is Big Reed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memory. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed. And keep in mind that if you want to listen to other episodes, you can find this podcast anywhere you receive podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. It's basically everywhere. Thank you guys for listening.